So this video is going to be about removing the manual shift linkage. So we have a video on how to remove the valve body. This is a A340E Toyota transmission. Okay, so I'm going to remove this right here. Remember, you can always check your valve bolt lengths to make sure they're installed correctly. But this video is going to be about removing the whole shift linkage that goes to your parking pawl right here. Okay, so I have my parking gear. We just made a video on that. The way it works is this is spring loaded. It goes into and shoves this parking pawl there, and then that locks it into let me get a pair of pliers real quick. So I just turn this, and that locks your parking gear. Okay, so I can move that parking gear around, and then you engage it. Remember, it only engages in at 5 miles an hour or less. So this is going to be about removing this whole linkage. So we're on a 2010 Toyota truck, Tacoma, two-wheel drive. It's an A340E, and we're at this step 24, disassembly. Remove parking lock pawl bracket. Okay, that's this bracket right here. So it's two 10 millimeters. So I want us to remove this bracket. There's one. And now I can remove this bracket right here, and now you can see that lever action, how that engages that parking pawl. Okay, and you can see there's a little taper on the pawl itself for when this engages. All right, so disconnect the parking pawl rod assembly from the manual valve lever. Okay, so it's saying that we could actually take this out of the transmission. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. So hit stop. Oh, 12. So we can't get that lever out, and we think it's the neutral safety switch that's causing it. So we're going to take off the neutral safety switch on this. First, we got to remove the shift lever assembly. There we go. Now we're going to remove the, looks like the 19 for that nut right here. Nope, bigger than that. There we go. Take that nut off, which was a 7/8 nut. And now we can take our neutral safety switch off with a 10 millimeter. Oh, no. This might be a 12. Yep. Screwdriver to get that out. There we go. All right, so now we got that out. Let's see if we can move this. Yeah, so what's happening is there's a little groove right in here. You can see how it locks in here, and there's a little hole. We just can't get it. We would have to remove this extension housing, and we're going to just take this as one unit because I don't feel like taking the extension housing off for this video. So the extension housing is what's preventing us from lowering this down far enough to get that out. All right, so let's go to the next step. So now it's telling us to remove the parking pawl shaft and from the front side, and remove the parking lock pawl and the spring from the automatic transmission. So here's the parking pawl, here's the spring, here's the shaft. So we're going to actually move this forward. So maybe it doesn't really tell you, but I think I'm going to have to remove the spring first. being very careful on how that spring goes. So this end that's in my finger goes in that slot. This end goes above this, okay? All right, and now I could take that parking pole pin out, and then I could take my parking pole out. I'm gonna reassemble that over here, so that way I know how it goes, okay? All right, let's go to the next step. Remove valve lever assembly. So using a screwdriver and hammer, cut off the spacer and remove it from the manual lever sub-assembly. Okay, so it's talking about the spacer right here. Okay, so this has to be removed so you can get access to this roll pin. You could see we already did it. So see this little hole that we drilled right here? So we had a, this was a detent that went into this hole. So we took a drill and we drilled it, and then we were able to slide this sleeve back right here, this sleeve. So once you slide this back, that exposes the roll pin. So we're actually ready to remove the roll pin, which is step B. Using a punch, 3mm punch and a hammer, tap out the spring pin from the manual valve lever assembly. So I'm gonna get a punch. So to remove this roll pin, there's actually a roll pin punch, which has a little tip on it like that. And that keeps it from expand or contracting when you hit it. So you should always try to use a roll pin punch when driving out roll pins. Okay, it just protects the roll pin. And I just did a big mistake. I just dropped that roll pin and it went down into the case. And I can't tell you how many times as a mechanic that has happened to me. So that roll pin went down inside the case. The only way we could get this out is to dump it over. And I have taken apart transmissions before, all the way back apart, because I dropped a little screw, a little spring, and it went down inside and I wasn't able to fish it out. So I'm kind of glad that it happened in the video, because it goes to show you're doing one repair, but that one repair could turn into a much larger repair just by having fumbling fingers and not being careful. So now I got that roll pin that out of the way that holds the shift lever to the shaft. Now I could slide this shaft completely out. Let's see, might go one way. Yep, it goes this way. And I'm gonna have to grab it with a pair of pliers, so I'm going to protect it, because remember, this seals onto a actual shift lever seal, so you do not want to take a chance in damaging this. Okay, and I see there's something else I could try right now. I could take a punch. I could put a punch in that roll pin hole, and then I could actually tap this. And let's see if that helps. There we go. Yep, that did it. Moving it and turning it at the same time, that allowed me to pull that shaft right out. Nice little trick that I was able to show you on this transmission. So you could use the actual roll pin hole to help leverage to get things apart. Okay, so now I could go ahead and pull this out right here, and that's my parking pole and shift lever assembly. And you could see now why I could not get this out. So you got to line the little arrows or flanges to there, then you can take this out. My worry is you take this out and then you forget, okay, did it go this way or go this way? You know, I tend to like to leave things together. The more you can leave together, the less you have to memorize on how it goes back in. Now we have our shift lever seal, and that's the main one of the main reasons why we're doing this. These things leak, and there's two of them. There's one on each side, because this is very rare that we have a shaft that goes through both sides of the case. That's very rare. So there's actually two shift rail or shift shaft seals. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that with a screwdriver. very carefully. Okay, let's see. Get behind there, and then I can pull that out. There's that one. Okay, I didn't damage it too much. Let's see if there's a little spring in there, and there is. See that little spring? That's really important. We don't, those always stay intact. Let's go ahead and see if I get this one out. Yep, there it goes. Don't want to take a chance of scarring that case. Again, this one has one of those little springs too we talked about in the extension housing video. So there we go. All right, that's the purpose of why we're removing this shaft, is you would remove that shaft if these were leaking. Okay, if these weren't leaking, I could probably do the whole overhaul and not remove this. So most of the time when I do a transmission overhaul, I don't take this linkage apart unless these seals are leaking. If I think these are suspect, then you got to take it apart and replace it as part of the overhaul. So you could also say if you're doing an overhaul and they're paying you $3,000, you should change every seal on the transmission, which includes these. So it's just where you're at with the ethics of, okay, they're paying you $3,000. Do you change every seal, or do you repair what is faulty in the transmission? So do you just tear it apart and replace the clutches and the bands and the inner seals, or do you do the external seals too? So you want to use Vaseline, petroleum jelly, or you want to use any trans-assembly lube. You don't want to use grease for this, okay? So this is petroleum jelly that just has little red dye in it. Sometimes it's blue. You put that in right here, and you pack that seal so that way that spring stays in there. And then you're gonna put that in, and they make a special tool for this, but I'm just gonna use a socket. And they do not take a lot of effort to push those seals in. And then there is a taper, so you want to go a little bit past the taper. Okay, try to get as level as you can. There we go. There is look real closely and you'll see there is a taper, and you want to be on the bottom side of that taper. Okay, you don't want to be on the top side because it's not all the way in. All right, we'll go ahead and do the other one now, and then we'll reassemble this thing. So get it to where it's past that taper. So I got it in flush, and I want to be a little bit past that taper. And I'm just going to go by feel. Feels good. Okay, now again, on a little bit of theory on this. Most people, when they think they have a transmission leak, they go for the gasket on the pan, okay? If that pan gasket doesn't leak, 90% of the time it's the shift shaft seal. So if you change the gasket, before you do the gasket, you better make sure that it's not leaking from that shift shaft seal, okay? Or if you do the gasket and you still have a leak, it's probably that seal. Oh, there it is. Look at that. I got lucky. I do not have to take this whole transmission together to get that roll pin. That doesn't always happen. All right, so I'm gonna put my shift lever in here, okay? Have it already assembled. Now I'm gonna put my shaft through, okay? To kind of help me guide it through, I'm gonna use that roll pin again, or use that roll pin hole, and I'm gonna go ahead and maybe tap this. Okay, and we want that roll pin hole to line up where the roll pin goes. Okay, so we're gonna kind of line that up, and then we're gonna rotate this together. There we go. Oh, went too far. There we go. Right there. Grab that little roll pin. This is where I need a smaller hammer. Okay. Nice little body hammer. Works good. We definitely want to stay away from this edge right here, and it looks like one of the students that did this transmission before might have hit that edge, that would be really bad, because that is probably a pump pressure port going into our valve body. If you damage this edge right here because you're sloppy with a hammer, you're not going to have any line pressure. We were playing around with it, and we had the parking pawl plunger right here past the parking pawl, and we really couldn't get this bracket on until we realized that this would actually never happen inside the transmission, because this sits right in that little groove, and then this fits on this side and then guides that whole shaft at the end, and then that keeps everything flowing nice and straight. So again, attention to detail is so important when we're putting things together. I would torque these bolts to spec. So let me look at the specs and stop. So I'm on reassembly now, and I wanted to show something right here. This is the air pressure checks that we went over in a different video, all the different places and what it applies. So my students that are in college, when you're doing the air pressure check, now you could go ahead and do the shift shaft seal as well. So we're gonna go, here you go, here is showing you a special tool to install the shift seal right here, okay? So the manual valve lever shaft oil seals, what they're calling it, and then install the shaft itself, then install the roll pin. Okay, now it's installing the bracket right here for the parking, or the parking pawl, and connect the parking lock rod assembly to the manual valve. And then here we go. Here's the torque spec. So 65 inch-pounds is what that bracket is attached to. So 65 inch-pounds. So I'm going to run this down by hand. And I'm not going to go a lot. Okay, this is an inch-pound torque wrench. Okay, so we're at 0. $65 right there. $65. We're good. I was missing one because, like I said, this is a shop transmission that we use for demonstration. So we are missing one bolt there. So now we're ready to put the shift lever assembly on. So we have our neutral safety switch now. I'm going to put that on. Okay. Remember, these are adjustable. We have another video on that. All right. So it was a 12 millimeter. I was looking for a 10 millimeter. Ford likes to use 10 millimeters for neutral safety switch. I'm not going to go over adjusting this because we already went over that in a different video. This video was mainly to go over shift shaft seals. Okay, this was a 19. Or no, it was a 7/8. I took it off with an impact gun. I am not going to do that going on. Okay, and then we have, okay, so we're putting this on. It's keyed, so it can only go on in one position. And then I'm going to tighten this nut down. This was, again, I would not use an impact gun to go back on with this nut. All right, last step was this. Slide that down. I wanted to emphasize, when you hammer these shafts out, if you hammered on this side, you would possibly damage the threads for this nut. If you hammered on this side or used pliers on this side, you would make it where it wouldn't seal. So again, the tool that I used was the punch in the roll pin hole. Really effective to not damage your shaft as you're installing it. I'm not going to film this. The remaining steps would be to put the valve body on, the filter on, and the pan gasket torque to spec. There's a whole nother video on that you can refer to. All right, so I should finish with this. You always want to check operation. So here's my transmission moving, and then boom, park. Rotating, park. And that is a must, that you verify the operation of that before you consider it complete.